One of the things that has always struck me is that the British seem to get a lot of pleasure out of little things. I mean, they are the only people in the world who can pack Tupperware and get
yes.
and have a real good time doing it.
And fold up rain hoods.
Is that charming or is it kind of sad?
I think we're a very limited nation. I think pleasure was a way overstatement, really. I don't think the British people don't like to have pleasure, really. They like to pass the time, and if they can find something that passes the time and doesn't involve too much physical effort, British people like to sit down, really, don't they? when I went to Weymouth, and I'd not been to seaside for ages, I noticed there were all these shelters along the pond with people sitting in them. There were tents on the beach with people sitting in them. There were windbreaks with people sitting behind them with cardigans on. They were blue. There were lots and lots of blue people, and they were just sitting. And you could tell they weren't going to do anything. But they'd got there, and that was it. And then at the end of the day, we'd say, right, we've sat here for 8 hours, and now we can go home. We went in a cafe the other day, and we ordered 4 jacket potatoes, and she said, "Oh, we've only got 3." I said, "Why? This is a cafe. Why have you only got 3 potatoes? I've got more potatoes than that in my house." It's an odd thing. We just don't have that, that hospitality, that warmth, and that catering thing. And one of the people I was with ordered a macaroni cheese. It really looked like someone vomited into an oven-proof dish. I thought, God. Look, when I was seasick the next day, I just threw that around just to save time.
If you were going to have a holiday in Britain, where would you go?
I would go somewhere I could walk, because I like walking. I don't like sitting anymore.
I mean, I've always thought it was strange. You have one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and people go and sit on the very edge of it and call it a holiday.
But if people, British people go for a picnic, they don't go for a picnic by a stream. They go by the side of the road and watch lorries go past, and they sit by a pile of loose chippings. I mean, we used to go abroad, but we would always find a pile of loose chippings, like near Munich or somewhere, and sit by that because we felt more comfortable.
Why do you think the British have this aversion to pleasure?
It just seems to be not in our nature. I think it's not in our nature to be celebratory. I think we're a putting up with sort of people. That's why we were so marvellous in the war, because we had so many things to put up with, and we put up with them all.
So happy as when there's
no, people like a bit of a shortage or a queue.
Somewhere in England, I'm delighted to tell you, there's a village called Titsey. Elsewhere you can find Licky End, Blubber Houses, Prittlewell, Netherwallop, Thornton le Beans, and, a particular favourite of mine, Shallow Bowels. Where I come from, place names tend to be flat and uninspiring. In Iowa, most towns were named after either the first pioneer to arrive or the last Indian to leave. Smithville, Jonesboro, Sioux City. So there's a particular pleasure to me in the rich and satisfied lilt of English place names. Altogether, there are some 30,000 place names in Britain, and a good half of them, I would guess, are notable or arresting in some way. Some, like Chew Magna or Spittle in the Street, are just resplendently silly. But many others, by their very names, summon forth images of lazy summer afternoons and butterflies darting in meadows. Winterbourne Abbas, Weston Lullingfields, Thedlethorpe All Saints, Little Missenden. I don't think it's exaggerating at all to say that a significant part of the satisfaction and appeal, and even beauty, of the British countryside lies in the place names. Just hear the words Little Rollright, Wooton Fitzpaine, or Compton Valence, and you can visualize the old stone church, the village green, the duck pond, like here in this quintessential slice of Middle England. I couldn't hear the conversations, but I could imagine the drift. No, I always sieve the flour. Sorry to hear about Giles's company. I'm sure he'll be all right. He was a partner, wasn't he? Well, I said London's only an hour away and I wouldn't move back. Daphne gave me a tremendous recipe for tofu. We've taken Fiona out of St. Buttocks. It just wasn't for her. We've got the new Audi, the turbo diesel version. The dogs adore it. It could be called upper income or twittering on the green. In fact, it's Milton Keynes. Yes, as in Newtown. Only this part of it has been kicking around for 800 years. Since the 1960s, the residents have had to cope with a bit of an image problem. But there is a positive side.
I owe my job to the new city. So I'm quite lucky to live in the village. I'm quite proud to live here and the whole thing.
But we are quite protective about it still being Milton Keynes Village, because all the new houses that are going up now are going to be referred to as Middleton, and they tried to change Milton Keynes Village name to Middleton. And we didn't like that, because we are the original village, and I don't think you can take that name away. I mean, we're very old here.
From here, we've got canals which go back to the 1800s. The old coaching roads up through Stony Stratford with the cock and bull stories and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's
so there's a lot
very
of history around here. There's a modern city in the middle of it, but there's a lot of history around.
All around Milton Keynes the village lies Milton Keynes the new town, where things could hardly be more different. Sterile, bleak, grey and empty, it's a monument to the infinite possibilities of concrete. The sort of place that might have looked good on paper, but doesn't work in the real world. Actually, I can't believe it ever looked good on paper. New towns in Britain always feel as if they were designed by people who heard about America on the radio. Most towns exist because people need a place to get together. Milton Keynes doesn't even seem to need people. It's just a place of glass offices and ring roads. You can walk for hours there and not see another pedestrian. The buildings are of that featureless type that you have to walk around completely at least once before you can identify the entrance. The streets are built on a characterless grid. The bus stops are coldly alphabetical. Before long, you cease to exist yourself, or so at least it can feel. The pedestrian walkways wander through a kind of subterranean netherworld, so that you constantly have to climb steps to see where you are. And where you are, always, is nowhere in particular. Milton Keynes is a place designed by a committee. Maybe they should have left it to one man. Saltaire in West Yorkshire is a model community that works. And the reason, I suspect, is that it's the vision of a single person, one Titus Salt, a textile magnate. Now a quiet suburb of Bradford, Saltaire was built between 1851 and 1876. It's difficult to know what to make of old Titus. On the one hand, he was one of that unattractive breed of teetotaling, self-righteous, God-fearing industrialists in which the 19th century seemed to specialize. A man who didn't want merely to employ his workers, but to own them. On the other hand, he gave them living conditions which in industrial Victorian England must have made the town seem a very Eden. But there was a price. Saltaire was a monument to his greatness, and they were not allowed for a moment to forget it. In search of details of this Victorian Valhalla, I went into a bookshop and came out with the owner, Clive Woods, a Salt devotee.
So what sort of people moved to Saltaire?
Well, our own MP, Chris Leslie, he lives here, and we've got our own member of the House of Lords.
And houses for sale?
Yes.
They're still desirable, these places?
Very, very much so.
Salt never missed an opportunity to immortalize himself and his family. Even the streets in the village were named for his wife, 11 children, or other family members. But his greatest, or at least most particular, monument to himself was his church.
Would you believe this is a nonconformist church?
No kidding.
Yeah. It's unique. It's a Grade 1 listed building. No expense was spared. Well, when Salt was building the church, Caroline, his wife, insisted that he put a balcony in for the family. He would never sit in it. He always sat with his workforce. And he was a bit of a joker because to get back at the wife, he went out and bought 2 massive chandeliers, and he situated them in such a way that when she was up in the balcony, she couldn't see what was going on in the church.
Titus's sense of humor extended to architectural detail, like putting the head of Bacchus, the god of wine, on a building devoted to temperance. His factory, built in the shape of a T for Titus, and known as the Palace of Industry, spread over 9 acres. At its peak, 1,200 looms produced over 17 miles of cloth a day. Titus was emperor of all he surveyed, and when he died, he had a funeral of almost imperial splendor. 100,000 people lined the streets. If we were to go back, looking at it from our modern perspective, would we be appalled by the conditions, or would we be impressed?
I think you'd be impressed. Again, the standard of housing provided is as good now as it was in its time. People still want to live in the houses of Saltaire. It's a very popular place to be.
But Salt himself never lived in Saltaire, though his son and successor, Titus Jr., did. In 1870, he built a great mansion about a mile away at a place called Milner Field. At the time, the family fortunes seemed boundless and perpetually secure. But in 1893, the textile trade went into a sudden slump, leaving the Salts dangerously overexposed. In short order, they lost the house, the mill, the village, and their money.
Welcome to the Great Hall. It's interesting to think that just a little over a century ago, Titus Salt Jr. could have stood on this space and been in one of the grandest houses in the north of England. And today it's essentially all gone. All that remains of Salt's house now is this.
A few patches of tiles from the floor of the conservatory, which once covered an area about the size of a tennis court.
The first time in 50 years this has been done.
Salt's workers would have been among the first to take annual holidays, helping in the process to establish resorts like Morecambe, which was then an exotic 3-hour train journey away. Today it can take near 4. Morecambe's golden age was in the 30s, and almost all that remains of it is the Midland Hotel. It was the age of the luxury liner, while on dry land, hotels captured some of the seaborne romance with sweeping lines and deck-like floor plans that were the hallmark of Art Deco. How elegant it must have been to take tea while listening to a wonderful piano recital. Times have changed at the Midland, as indeed they have for Morecambe. I asked for, and got, a room as far away from the lobby as possible. It's difficult for today's visitor to comprehend, but Morecambe was once the premier northern resort. As late as the 1950s, it boasted 1,300 boarding houses and hotels, some of them the equal of the finest in Europe. The Midland stood at the top of the pile. The Midland itself, like the town it lies in, is an enigma. Art Deco was made possible by the invention of concrete, but the local builders couldn't cope with the stuff and built the hotel with good northern brick and then plastered it over and painted it. I have to sleep here tonight. It would be like sleeping in Barbara Cartland's handbag. They've spent £60 million on improvements to Morecambe in recent years. Seeing it today, it's hard to believe that this was once a resort that outdid Blackpool. It was the birthplace of bingo, lettered rock, and the helter-skelter. It lent its name to half a comedy duo. Today it has some go-karts you could walk faster than, a choice of stone benches, a little chug-chug train that goes from nowhere special to nowhere special, a new promenade to keep the bay at bay, and visitors so few in number that they are worth recording.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice.
It's hard to credit that once Morecambe accommodated 100,000 people a day.
On the plus side, I do have the beach all to myself.
The greatest surprise about Morecambe isn't that it's declined, but that it ever prospered in the first place. Now at last it's discovered that its only possible future lies in not being Blackpool. I just wonder if the place can hold out until that becomes common knowledge. You can take away your piers and Big Dippers. A seaside resort will always have something for me, as long as there's a genuine Italian emigre ice cream parlor good enough to win a diploma of merit in the horizontal freezer section. The Brucianis have been in the town for a century. I first came to Morecambe in the 1980s. Even then it was a resort that clearly had seen better days, but there remained a certain charm. You could see that it was never going to return to its former glory.
But that doesn't really matter. There was a string of lights that ran the whole length of the prom. When I was out one night for a walk, the only person out on the front anywhere, The wires above me began to crackle and hum, and after about 5 minutes, the lights very reluctantly came on. And I realized that that was the illuminations at Morecambe. It was kind of pathetic, really, but there was something rather sweet and endearing about it. I liked it. And now those lights are gone, and I miss them.
Your greatest export, the thing you should be most proud of, is the English language. And if it were to have a head office, why not in Stratford-upon-Avon? It was George Bernard Shaw who said that the English and Americans are two peoples divided by a common language. Sometimes it can divide even those of us who come from the same side of the ocean.
Those thatched roofs have a wire mesh holding them. It wasn't that way years ago. They didn't have wire mesh, did they?
I haven't the faintest idea what he was on about. However, it is true that more often than not the confusion exists between the two main English-speaking nations, rather than within them. Altogether, there are 4,000 common words in English that are used differently on one side of the Atlantic Ocean from the other. While to you this is a coachload of pensioners in trousers and trainers arriving in a car park and queuing up in a herb garden filled with basil and aubergines, to us Yanks it's a busload of senior citizens arriving in a parking lot in pants and sneakers and standing in line in an herb garden filled with basil and eggplant.
Then when I came here, somebody apologized or said that they were not queue jumping. And I've never...
You never heard that?
Never heard that until here.
Was there anything on menus that mystified you?
Well, prawns.
Prawns, yeah.
Yes, I had a prawn sandwich today, and it was good, but it was shrimp.
Yeah.
There are those who find the infinite variety and elasticity of English a source of delight, and there are those who do not.
I should have won it in 2 sets, easy. I'm rather worried about that because easy isn't quite...
Michael Russell is a representative of the Queen's English Society.
Now, that goes alongside the boy he done good and all these other awful abrasive things which Americans obviously have no knowledge of English language.
Well, because a tennis player in a spontaneous moment in an interview failed to use the adverb correctly, you're making a rather sweeping judgment about a whole nation.
Absolutely.
I asked him to step outside.
To what extent would you hold us, Americans, accountable for decline in English?
It is a great mistake to think that American is English. It's not, it's American. And it started out maybe 200 years ago as the kind of English that was spoken here, but it's been exported and it's been swilled around quite a bit. And now a lot of it, because of communication and travel, is all washing back again. And some of the things that are used by English people, the media and so on, are actually Americanisms. We have had in the courts recently a number of cases where women have claimed that they have been subjected to demeaning practices in their place of work.
I'm sorry, but I've lost the strand here. What does this have to do with linguistics?
Well, the media pick up on it, you go on television, and in the first week they were being accused of some kind of harassment. And within 3 or 4 days, it had become harassment. And there was nobody around to say, excuse me, gentlemen, we're British, would you mind actually saying harassment so that everybody's got the same pronunciation?
And if you don't know how to spell it, you'll find it in the dictionary between half-baked and hogwash.
But I still think that standard English itself ought to be that. It ought to be standard.
My problem with this sort of thinking isn't that I resent being told how to speak, because I can decide that for myself. My problem is that it was this sort of you must speak as I tell you attitude that drove all the other languages of Britain to the margins. It was because children were forbidden to speak Welsh or Gaelic on the playgrounds that they've become so endangered. English is a wonderful language, however you pronounce Harris, but it's not so special that it can't make room for other languages. It's as well to remember that English is by no means the most venerable tongue on these islands. Had it not been for some German invaders who crossed the Channel in the 5th century and harassed the hell out of the Celts, we would all now be speaking something quite different. On South Uist in the Outer Hebrides, Gaelic is still a feature of everyday life, but it faces an uphill battle against the irresistible lure of English. I'm here to meet a man of words, the island bard, but I'm being taken there by a man of letters, Donald Steele. What language did you grow up with?
Both. A mixture of both.
Really? A mixture of both? So what made you switch over to English exclusively?
Well, like when the children were young, I spoke Gaelic to them when they were small babies. As when they were older and went to school, English that was at school, so we just spoke English to them. So we just spoke English at home all the time.
Have the kids you grew up with, your mates,
Uh-huh.
how many of them are still on the island?
Not many, they're nearly all away.
Really?
Yes, majority of them, it's probably just only a handful of them left at home.
Is that because of work or because they wanted something more exciting?
They just wanted to go away and see what it was all like, and enjoyed it, probably stayed.
What brings you to the island?
Well, I'm doing research at the moment I'm preparing a PhD thesis on human migration on the Western Isles. I've been a regular visitor on the islands. I came here in '92 for the first time. I kept coming back every year because I sort of fell in love with the islands.
South and North Uist mark the point where two peoples, the Celts and Vikings, met and decided to put down their battle axes and pick up umbrellas. There was, after all, enough conflict in just dealing with the elements. They kept themselves to themselves, and as a consequence, there's a severe shortage of surnames. I don't think it was a lack of intelligence or imagination, but Christian names also have the added joy of repetition, so much so that it is hard not to find a Donald MacDonald in each of the MacDonald homesteads. I was looking for Donald MacDonald the Bard, as opposed to Donald MacDonald the Shepherd, or Donald MacDonald the Mechanic, or Donald MacDonald the brother of Ronald MacDonald. It's easy to find his cottage. You go to the edge of nowhere, and then go a bit further.